Chapter 27, Home. I dropped us down between what was Cuba and South Florida, and both were now almost connected with dry land. As we came in over the last remnant of water between what was the two countries, we finally could see the city on the immediate horizon. And it was as if it came right out of one of those doomsday movies, exactly as depicted in them. We could tell, even from here, it was a dead city. There were some lights on, but they were probably automatic. There were the slabs of buildings that remained from smaller structures and homes, some covered with sand and some semi-exposed, but some of the patterns of where they used to be were visible still. A remnant of a subdivision here and there, and many places had more left that didn't rot or had been taken by the sea. Some of the sturdier block or concrete walls were still there. Some of the city's bigger buildings, skyscrapers, landmarks, bridges, were left standing, and some of them were toppled over. There were different water level marks on them with piles of debris around their bases. We could even tell that some of the higher building roofs were used as a last-ditch effort to stay alive, because there were skeletons visible here and there, but no signs of living people here. The ruins suggested to us that there would be nothing of any value here. It was in essence a ghost town, far from the ocean now and landlocked. We figured the dead people on top of the still standing buildings had survived as long as they could, and used up all of the supplies they could gather from below them. These people must have died during the flooding. There would be no sense in checking for supplies here, especially since we were unarmed. The amazing thing was that the glade seemed to have enlarged, even though it was drier. Its habitat had more trees now, with only patches of the great swamp visible. Palms and palmettos of different sizes took over now with oak hammocks, maples and elms. There were places where the South American pepper tree had taken over. Surely, I thought, most animals would escape to these subtropics and tropical zones from some of the extreme northern United States and Canada, or at least one could only hope. It seemed everywhere we looked the roads had disappeared, but there still were outlines in places, as the growth of plants and sand outlined where the highways and roads used to be, and in some places the roads were exposed as if nothing had happened. The thing that dawned on me was, so far, there seemed to be no place where we might scavenge supplies. Everything was in ruins. And just viewing all this made us both solemn and quiet. We needed proof that at the very least birds and animals of some sort survived. So I dropped us down in elevation to have a closer look. We had to know. Amy responded, "How close are you going to go?" "Close enough to see the wildlife that I suspect is there and still alive. Some wildlife had to survive. What do you think?" "Well, okay, don't get too close. I sense danger near." "Okay, I trust your senses. We won't stay low for too long." I swung us over a small lake to see if any living creature or thing was visible. "There," she suddenly shouted, "an alligator." Yes, finally, they are survivors. Then, "Look," she shouted. "Fish!" This was the first uplifting thing we had seen since getting back here. Life, some life survived, or at least some of it. This was the first uplifting thing we had seen since getting back here. Life survived, or at least some of it survived. We cruised northward past the lake, traveling slowly now and above the palmettos and scrub brush, when we spotted a wild boar hog that looked to be over 200 pounds, then a female with a bunch of piglets in pursuit. There were egrets and smaller jays and sparrows. Everything we've seen bolstered our outlook somewhat and gave us some sort of hope. Life survives. Later, as we navigated our way, we were following what used to be Interstate 95. And when we were near what must have been Fort Lauderdale is when Amy went off with alarm. "I sense danger. Take us up quickly." As she shouted this, I looked at the radar, and there was what I considered a missile heading our way. So I floored it in an upward direction and simply outran it. But it followed us till it ran out of propellant, fell back to Earth, and as we watched it hit the ground, it exploded. We didn't have an idea if our force field was at a safe level for such an impact, so my instinct to survive now was at an extreme high. My reactions were second nature. Amy followed where its trajectory came from. We were way above the reach of any other object that might come our way. Then we focused our telescope in on who or what was shooting at us, and we could see a tank and some small ground troops or renegades who were in possession of these war machines. "Can you read them, Amy?" I waited for her response. "All I'm getting are they are on the hunt for supplies and anything they can find useful to them with little regard for life. These people will try to take. These are the people to avoid for sure. They're renegades. They are bewildered. They don't know where we went and are searching the sky where they last seen us. They don't know we are above and behind them now. They are also scared of us. They know now we do not look like who is in power, those they work for, or have our same capabilities as well." Then I said, "I wonder who that is now that would have our capabilities. Let's get out of here before they see us again. We don't have one weapon for protection." We proceeded north, following what was the beachfront. We could see the old shorelines and dunes, so we used that as a marker, knowing that from there I might have a better chance at finding the shop more easily. This would be done by the ping of the beacon now, since the topography changed so much. If we could find some kind of marker like an inlet to the Indian River, that would help, but the climate change had even disrupted those land and sea markers. The Indian River lagoon wasn't visible now because of the vegetation. It was there, but it was a trickle flow now and hidden under the growth. We were hoping for something, a clue, something that would tell us what happened to our friends and crew members. We remained hopeful they had survived. There could be some terrain that was familiar, marked with structures, roads, or something we recognized, but the ground below went through unbelievable changes. Even bridges along the coast over the inlets had collapsed and now were buried. I would have never thought from being in isolation for as long as we were that such a great earth change could happen in such a short geological time span. We are definitely experiencing it, though. You know, she said, I can't believe we have had contact with humans and alien creatures on another planet without a conflict. Then we come back to our world only to be shot at again. What the hell? The only thing I could say to that was, it's all quite a shock, isn't it? We kind of anticipated this happening, but not under these conditions. Then I added to ease our emotions, we could always leave and go back, I said, hoping I wouldn't upset her too much. I know, baby, I know, she said solemnly. Amy was recording bits and pieces of terrain as we went. We had to now continually watch it, magnify it on our screens as we scanned different sections below at this high altitude and slower speed. We certainly didn't want to rush up on more militia or gangs. There was so much to take in, and then a glint from sunlight to our west caught our eye. So we left the shoreline and we headed west. We decided to have a look. We dropped below any radar beams that might be scanning the skies. We were at about 500 feet or less. When we arrived where we had seen the glint, there were thousands of cars piled up on what was I-95. Some were buried, some were not. Many were pushed literally along with trash and piles of wood, debris. There were mounds of cars and trucks. This must have been a place where the floodwaters cut up to a great exodus northward, an evacuation that ended just about 40 miles or so north of another ghost town, Lauderdale. I noticed that some of the bridges were still intact and most of them had a marker that named the street or town where it crossed the highway. And then I knew at this speed, in an hour or so, we would be close to our home base. If I stayed over what was 95, I could find the right crossroad maybe, and it would be marked, and all I had to do was take a right turn at the right road, if it was still there, and we would be about 5 miles to the east to search to answer the question of whether or not our base was still there with our crew. We focused in with the cameras and watched for the signs on the bridges. Most were formed in concrete, some were painted on. Some of them were collapsed, but the further north we went, the more of them we found intact. The lateral roads that led away from 95 weren't so visible, though. Most were overgrown with vegetation. The vegetation on the roads that grew through was in a different color in respects to what grew on the sides of these roads, and shorter, which made a grid pattern out of roadways seem still visible. So this wasn't going to be as hard as we thought. We just had to find the right viaduct. We figured the cell tower at the end of Grant Road would be a good marker if still up. The base from there would be difficult to find because of the changes, but it would be close when we found the right crossroad. It took Amy a little while as she combined the ping with our radar because our old backyard now was going to be pretty much unrecognizable, and we would need this to pinpoint its location. Check it out. The ping is originating from the direction north and to the east about where we are now, which should be near the shop. I dropped us down to be able to read what was on the first one. We looked at it and it was the one before Grant. Sebastian. So we knew the next one was it, but still about 20 miles away. We noticed somebody had used this bridge for shelter for a while, but were now long gone. Our awareness of people became more heightened as we went because there were signs of where people had been and stayed while traveling north. There it is, Grant Road. We did a right-hand turn, followed it east. The pinging should be behind us now at the cell tower, but it wasn't. The cell tower was still there, but it's not pinging. It was still ahead. We were thrilled. It had to be the boys at the shop. As we flew over and closer to the road, when we followed Grant Road, we could see that it had been used sometime in the recent past, which made us become more aware and let our instincts kick in. I estimated about where the shop was according to the radar, and soon we were right over it. There it was. Always a pond or small lake there, but there were many of those now, and then we both seen it. A wing of a plane. This had to be it, I said. I set us down in a hidden spot behind a group of cypress trees and brush. We scanned the area with the radar and cameras, and there was nothing to worry about. There were some birds near us, which were nice to see and hear, and that was it. Are we ready for this? I answered, let's do it. We got out and we walked for a while around the area, which was good. We needed to get our legs back. And then there it was, sticking out of the ground. It's Drew's plane, Amy shouted. The brush was hiding most of it. Then we could start making out the outlines of the buildings and the shops that used to be there, but no signs of anything else except scrap metals, semi-buried in spots with some wood scraps that used to be parts of the buildings or structures, plus some metal that were incorporated in them. There were things we recognized here still, but no sign of our friends. Amy started to cry as she hung her head down with one hand on her brow. I took her in my arms and reassured her that it would be all right. These guys were around somewhere, I reassured her. We just needed to find them. They wouldn't have left a beacon. That seemed to help as she returned to her normal composure after a couple of minutes. I said they probably relocated when the flooding started, and for some reason they weren't concerned that this beacon was pinging. Then it dawned on me. Amy, come on. Let's find where the house was. As we walked over in a direction we thought it might be, we could see bits of scraps that water had moved and piled them against tree trunks that were still standing but dead now. They seemed to be everywhere. The only ones still living were the cypress in this area. The bunker, I shouted. Wasn't long till we were within 10 feet of where the house used to be, because there, under the brush and dirt, was the other plane buried now. Also, it had sat right next to the house. We could make out the slab, which was now noticeable to us. The flooding must have destroyed the rest of the walls. Near that corner there should be a set of solar panels that powered it and the shop. When the power from the utilities would go out, they would take over. Plus, it was a money saver. We found them, but they were destroyed too. Amy stated what I also knew. Under this corner should be the emergency doorway, right? Yes, ma'am, I said. She asked, how are they keeping a beacon going then? Don't know. We're going to need some tools and power or a battery pack, so we need to go back to the can and get set up. Amy agreed with that plan. Might as well eat and get ready to spend the night. It'll be dark soon anyway. I agreed, and we headed for our ship to regroup. Amy asked along the way, "Do you think they have left supplies in there or a clue as to what had happened to them?" "Probably," I answered. "I would think so. They are some of the smartest people I know. They just wouldn't die and roll over. After all, they had our technology at their disposal, so they could survive very well if in the right place." Then she asked, "But not here, right?" "Right," I said. It was too open and the water would have been too high for too long. There is an air vent that went up to the highest cypress, which was camouflaged. This air vent had two shut-off valves, one at the top and one underground. But even with all of that, they wouldn't have lasted long and would have run out of breathable air and supplies probably. The basement, the bunker, wasn't that large. If we find that air duct, I guarantee you there's a shortwave antenna attached to it. You want to bet? Matter of fact, the biggest chunks of secondhand steel and aluminum aren't here either. We should see remains of the crane somewhere nearby, but it's gone, and so are the dump trucks. We had some work to do now, so the time was spent doing what we needed to be done, and that kept our minds from depression of the situation. "What do you think is in the bunker?" she asked. "Food, I hope, and hopefully information on what happened here," I said, with a bewildered look. "God, I hope so. Please let it be so." As we entered our ship for the night, we both kept busy working and gathering the things we would need for the next day. "There must be a reason why they are not afraid to transmit an analog," I said. "It must be obsolete now," she said. "Maybe so," I answered. "That must be the reason." "No one is watching or listening to it anymore?" "Maybe so," I answered. "That might be the reason. No one is listening anymore." "Here's something I was looking at," she said. "It's the temperatures as we traveled, and they seem to point out that the climatic zones are all still here but compressed laterally around the world. At the latitude we are at, it will probably drop to around 40 degrees or more tonight, and about 3 miles north of our position, we will be in a more fall and winter climate. Good job, baby. Keep learning all we can. We need to know everything we can figure out." As I gathered up all I would need for the next morning, Amy laid out our meal for the night. I stated, "We'll keep our can running so we could fire up our heaters for the night and compress oxygen to replenish our supply. Tomorrow, I would have to also land closer to the bunker so I could tap it into our 12-volt system with our speaker wires. We had about 45 feet if wired together. This would be the best way to power up and open the door to the bunker. This was the safest way to open the door without losing any of our ship's ability for any reason. We would keep it running all night, all the next day. I prayed that the bunker wasn't flooded. If it was, everything would be rusted, shut, and destroyed. We'd never be able to open it if it had been compromised. We both realized that this was the safest place to scavenge or acquire provisions for now, and information at the same time. We needed to know the whereabouts of our friends. Any place that we would need to look over would be now very dangerous to us and a risk to our lives and freedom. So we would look here first, and hopefully all we would need would be here. So we both had to know the big question now, which was, how long can we last? Best case, worst case scenario. Amy's answer to the question was, we have 3 meals left each with some sodas and juices and very little water left, maybe 2 gallons. I answered, well, we can't get any from here, so now we need to use the woods or a bathroom to conserve water. This was important, and we have to brainstorm how we would acquire some water from an uncontaminated source and how to purify it also if need be. We have no way of testing water or testing much of anything, she said sadly. Well, we have a couple days to figure it out, I said. The ship is on, everything's running, so I'll take us up near the top of the cypress trees that surround us and lock us up in a position under the hammock. That way we'll be hidden fairly well by the canopy of the swamp. We talked long into the night about every move we would make when back on the ground, so we wouldn't waste too much time exposed and in the open. The next morning when I woke up, I felt her weight on my body, her head on my chest. The weight of her legs crossed over mine and interlocked with mine, and her long flowing hair spread out like a comforter across my chest with the heat emanating from her special places on my skin. I almost had forgotten the feeling, but it was like home now again. Then as we woke, we realized the day before us had started, so we rose and got on with our work. I took us up about 1,000 feet and ran the radar to see if there was anything of immediate attention in the area, but there was nothing. I landed behind where the house used to be with the bunker door within reach of the wire leads I had prepared. I grabbed the toolbox and we both headed to where the opening of the bunker was and cleared it with a makeshift shovel. I then opened the control box and hooked up the power, and then, when I was ready, I instructed Amy to go inside and connect the ground wire that was in place with the negative battery terminal, which was completing the circuit. The batteries I was using were the dry cells that were rechargeable. She was to stay there and watch our backs as I now had lit up the panel. The control panel was in a waterproof box, so all I had to do was punch in the key pad and the key code. And if the motor on the trap door still worked, it would open. Seconds ticked by, and then it opened with a swoosh of stale air escaping from below. It was cold and antiquely dank. The smell of it hit my face. I signaled up to Amy, who was at the console of our ship, that it was open. She came to the door to hear the condition of it and to tell me opening the door drained our dry cells. The first thing I said was, "Oh crap." Then I related to her, "It's dry," and I shouted to her as I disconnected the wires. She gave me the thumbs up, pulled the wires back into the ship, and went to her post and deployed the solar cells and started watching out for us again. If something happened, there was no way I could make it to the ship. The clearing was small, and at best, all she could do was to shut the door and escape. She at this time was as adept as I was at flying the can, so I sent those thoughts to her now. She argued in my head for a few seconds till I made her stop and think about it. She finally accepted the fact. I said, "After you know it's safe for a while, shut down all the instruments, lights, you know what to do. It'll charge quicker." She thought, "You asshole, I'll never leave without you." I guess she didn't accept the facts. Nevertheless, I had to move and do this quickly. I entered the bunker and turned on my small flashlight, and it all came rushing back. I started to remember everything we did in here and how we installed everything we needed to communicate with. Ground control is where I was standing. It was our communication bunker also. I flipped switches and there was no power to light it up. It was all still there but dead now except for the transmitter. I wondered how it was still powered. Then I saw a new type of battery. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. It must have been off till it sensed one of our transmissions. That was the only thing that made sense, and that it was just that much more advanced. I hit the generator switch, but it had no power to start up. Then, as I moved my light, skimming across the wall, I noticed something. I moved the light back, and there, scrawled on the wall in bright red, were the words, "You will know in New Mexico." I stood there frozen for a few moments. Then I noticed a can of red paint that was still on the console with a fresh, clean brush. I immediately knew what to do. I would need to cover what they wrote on the wall because I now revealed the bunker and the door would never shut again. They are in hiding for a reason, and I called Amy into my mind to view what I was seeing. She was elated. My mind went over every possibility of the meaning. It was a clue of some sort related to the story I had told them, we thought. The beacon is sending from here, and all this is pointing to where? New Mexico. It's got to be them, and they are there now, but how to find them? That was a question we had to figure out. We were a little more relaxed now and knew that our friends were probably all right, so I moved on to one of the deeper rooms looking for supplies. Nothing was for sure except we needed food and water to be able to buy us as much time as possible, so that chore was pressing on our minds now. Looking around, it was obvious to me they had stayed and used this shelter for a while, as certain things were in disruption and certain things were missing. It appeared to me there must have been at least 12 people down here at one time, because there were that many bunks. I went in deeper to a lower level, and there it was, what we were looking for. Food, and as a bonus, weapons also. We were set up. I had to move this stuff quickly. All of what I found told me that it was left for us and that they were well aware of the state of the world, which I assumed and Amy assumed wasn't good. They must have received the message we sent at light speed from the Kepler system. I also got the impression they couldn't communicate with us directly. They were on radio silence for some reason. I understood somewhat what that reason was, and the best part now was they left us a major clue of their location. I related all this to Amy, who was now at the door of our ship, and I began to climb up and down a ladder with supplies on my shoulder till she could reach them and pull them into the ship. Then, when that was done, I went back to hide the message and the doorway the best I could. I disconnected the beacon and scavenged its power source so it couldn't be turned on again. I then went to shut the bunker door, but dirt got in the way and it was slightly open, and it was as far as I could shut it. So the best thing I did was I camouflaged it, hid it. The beacon was on our emergency shortwave radio frequency, And we kind of figured that when it was shut down, they would know that it was us and that we were back. At least I thought. Amy thought the same. We didn't know how far-reaching these militias were, nor who was in control of the government, but we realized that the technology we possessed was something they would want to capture for a superior military advantage, if they could. And we had no idea what they would do to us, but we had an idea what could be valuable to them, and one of those things would be women. My guess was these were the reasons for our crew's silence. I related all of what I proceeded throughout my discovery in the bunker, and when I did, Amy's demeanor changed into cautious but happy. Many people also must have went underground in higher, deeper places. They were probably the ones in control. Amy asked, "What can we do to improve our capabilities?" "I have an idea. Here's a microphone from that old radio from the bunker. I'll run a speaker wire to our radio dish, and that will amplify the sound in the air, so we could hear anything coming our way. When we are hiding in the trees, we need that advantage. You've heard of a sonic ear, haven't you?" "Yes." "Well, now we have one. I just have to wire it correctly through our system and amplify it through our music amplifier. This is what we did the rest of the day, and we decided to stay here for one more night, just in case they are watching the skies, whoever they are." As we ate our sea rats for dinner, Amy said, "It's too bad we can't travel back in time to change things." "Well, we know we can travel to a future as we have done, so it might just be feasible to go back, but I am at a loss as how to do it or what it would take." "At this point, we really couldn't hurt humanity's destiny, could we?" she asked. "You mean as far as a paradox?" "Well, we wouldn't have much to lose. Maybe not for everyone else, but it might affect us directly, and I can't even imagine how. Then, depending on how far back you could go to warn everyone, plus, to have an effect, you would need serious proof." "We have that proof recorded." "Yeah, but we can't with this ship. It has its limits. As far as we know, we haven't experimented enough to even know if it's possible. We have shaved some time off coming back, but to go faster than that, don't know how. I doubt that you can go back, and I believe it would be futile to attempt it even if you could." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I seriously doubt people would listen to us, and they would only steal our technology even if we could go back. The paradox might be that you can't change things once they happen. But here's a thought. Did these guys write the message on the wall because I told them the story? Or were they the reason the story exists in the first place? Because they have advanced technology by now, more so than what we have. Was the clue inserted because they knew the story, or were they responsible for it to begin with?" Crazy thoughts. "Wow, that's twisted," she replied. "Yes, it can become so twisted that you may have to correct what you have done over and over again. That's the danger of traveling back in time. You could be trapped in a time loop trying to fix what you messed up if you lived after the mistake. But that would also explain many things, like it seemed almost as if windows were opening up from some other time or dimension, because that is what people would see from this side of time. It would appear as if a window to some other realm opened up and you could see into that future." or another future, or another future's world's timeline. Our friends had 14 years or more to discover all the aspects of our technology. If our clocks are accurate, they wouldn't rather know, till now, that they were the ones responsible for what I witnessed back then, because there was a difference in the crafts I seen back then. Who knows? Or the simpler reason, they only used that because they knew it would ring our bells, make us choose the correct path. Occam's razor. It's a lot to think about, isn't it? What is Occam's razor, she asks. It is a line of reasoning that says the simplest answer is often the correct answer. So yes, it's a lot to think about, almost too much. Let's keep our minds occupied with today. There's no guarantee that they are even still around, even now, but it looks like they are. When we find out one way or another about them and our relatives, we'll know what our next move is. This was our dinner conversation that evening, and that's what I loved about her, which is, she wasn't afraid to speculate about our predicament, as frightful as it was. After dinner, we switched on our sonic ear, and it worked. I figured out that this gave us about 2,000 yards more of a warning through any dense obstacles, as an extra precaution of any approaching dangers on the ground. As we were locked back up in the canopy of the cypress and the oak trees for cover, we went to bed listening for any unusual sounds, but all we heard was the regular night noises of creatures and creaks and rubbing groans of the trees and the wind rubbing each other as the wind passed through them. The wind was a comforting sound in a way, and we both agreed that in today's world there seemed to be more wind than in the past. We speculated that this was due to the climate now, which was compressed around the middle of the globe, and the fact the Earth had already been in precession, or starting its precession when we left, is probably in the middle of it now. We made plans that night about what and how we would do things the next day. Then we made love on Earth for the first time in a long time. By our estimates, 1 day and 14 years later. Next, Chapter 28, Surprise.